Yeah. Thanks again to everybody for coming out tonight. I always enjoy coming out to public meetings. We've had some really good dialogue. Got to ask some really hard questions. I'm sure you'll have some really hard questions for us tonight. And feel free to share your opinions. We've got that all along, so we look forward to doing that again tonight. So again, I'm with the State of Washington Department of Ecology, and Ecology's role is as the environmental regulator of it. One of the environmental regulators. We share that with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So I'll go ahead and get going. We'll go through these slides pretty quick. We don't want to overwhelm you with slides. Up on the screen, you see a map of the Hanford site, and there's a blue ribbon going through that. And that's the Columbia River, 45 miles of undammed, non-tidal free-flowing Columbia River, and that's the last stretch like that on the Columbia River main stem. So that's really a national treasure, and that's really been our focus, I think, for cleanup for the past 25 years is making sure we protect that. So we want to keep doing that. We've done a lot of the cleanup along the Columbia River shoreline, and we're starting to shift focus to the central part of Hanford, which is smaller, about 20 square miles, but a lot harder and very difficult. So we're going to talk about changes to the schedules for that today. And that's the 200 west area and 200 east area. You can see that in the middle there. Okay, so why are we here? So Hanford contamination has to be investigated and it has to be cleaned up. And I'll talk on another slide about what we mean when we talk about investigation or characterization, and what we mean when we say cleanup. Because it needs investigation and cleanup, there's a legal agreement called the Tri-Party Agreement. There's three parties: Ecology, EPA, and the U.S. Department of Energy. And that agreement has requirements and schedules for the Department of Energy, and it also divides up how the work gets done and has some rules of working with each other. There's a huge amount of work up there, about $115 million to go, and we divide that up into about 16 major projects, which are going to take many years, decades in some cases. And those are called major milestones. We set schedules for those major projects. Each of those major milestones, because it takes so many years to do, we've also divided up into to have some interim schedules, and we set interim deadlines or interim milestones for those as well. So we're going to talk about a whole lot of those interim milestones tonight. One of the big purposes of those milestones or schedules is they help us identify how much funding is needed to do the work up at Hanford. And that funding request goes up to the United States Congress, and they have to appropriate money to do that cleanup work. That's how the work gets done. We changed the milestones up there quite a lot, and the reasons we changed them is we get new information as we're doing investigations or cleanup. We find new things or understand things better. Some of the milestones get missed because it's difficult work or for other reasons. And sometimes, quite often, pretty much every year, Congress appropriates less money than is needed to do the work in any given year. So that's one of the reasons we're here tonight. When we make those changes, our tri-party agreement requires us to come out and ask for public comments from you tonight, particularly, and that's why we're here. Okay, I'm going to try and talk about investigation and cleanup in really simple terms using pictures. I think pictures illustrate things a lot better than me talking or words on a slide. So one of the ways that contamination gets cleaned up at Hanford is, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide there. Going back. So we talk about how contamination gets investigated. So we start out with paper, and that paper is a plan to investigate the contamination. That's illustrated by the set of binders in the upper left-hand corner. And then following the arrow down, once there's a plan for investigating, the Department of Energy does things like drilling into the soil. And the picture on the lower left-hand corner shows an angle drill going into the soil into a contaminated area. That soil gets taken out of the ground, and then you go to the next picture and gets put into little sample bottles that get sent off to a laboratory. You see a chemist working there in the bottom center, and you get numbers out of that, how much contamination is in the soil. And those numbers end up in another set of paper, the reports shown in the upper right-hand corner. And those reports describe, where is the contamination, how high is it, and also describe proposals for cleaning it up. And then when we have those proposals for cleanup, we come back out and talk to the public again, as illustrated by the picture in the lower right-hand corner. Okay, so once a proposal for cleanup is approved, actual cleanup gets done. And so here's a couple pictures showing how that gets done. Upper left-hand corner, you see a backhoe digging up soil. That soil goes to a truck. contaminated soil goes to a lined landfill in the central part of Hanford. And then another thing that happens is contaminated buildings get knocked down. There's over 400 contaminated buildings left at Hanford. So the lower left-hand corner, you see a building getting knocked down, water gets sprayed to keep contamination from being up in the air, and the rubble from that building will go into a truck that goes to a lined landfill in the center part of Hanford. Besides contaminated soil and buildings, there's also contaminated groundwater. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see a groundwater sample that's green. I think you can see that, and that shows that it has a lot of chromium in it. Once the groundwater is sampled and there's an understanding of where the contamination is and how high the numbers are, the groundwater gets pumped out of the ground and treated in a big treatment building like you see in the lower right-hand corner. Okay, so we go back to the TPA milestones and talk about, again, about what those are, because that's what we're changing tonight. Major milestones are the end date for the large projects that take place over several years. Interim milestones set the pace to finish that cleanup work on time. And again, those milestones are really important because they identify to Congress how much money is needed to do the work in any given year. And if milestones are earlier, it shows they're a higher priority, and if they're later out in the schedule, it shows they're maybe a lesser priority. Okay, so again, why are we changing some of these milestones we're talking about tonight? We focused on the Columbia River for the past 25 years and done a lot more work on the Columbia River and relatively little work in the central part of Hanford. So that's going to push the schedule for the center part of Hanford way out. We also have more information about what the contamination is like in the center part of Hanford. Because we've been doing some work, we understand it better than we did 25 years ago. We can set better schedules. And we've also realized that the cleanup work in the central part of Hanford requires more resources, money, trained personnel, equipment, and technology than we currently have. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John and Sean.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks again for everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to your comments. So we're going to talk here about the specifics of the milestones that we're proposing and extending. And it really plays back to what John said. You know, we have to characterize the contamination that's out there in the Central Plateau, make decisions with your input on what to do with that contamination, and actually go do the cleanup. So we'll talk about that in terms of the milestones that we're proposing on extending. Next slide.
Oh, I gave you the quickie.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So, you know, the TPM milestones all have numbers. It's an M- something, and this is the M15 sets of milestones. We're going to talk about 5 different sets of milestones. And this is the set of milestones that talks about the commitments that we make to characterize the contamination up on the Central Plateau. Now, we're talking about a lot of waste sites, hundreds and hundreds, a lot of facilities, hundreds and hundreds. Some are more important, some are harder to deal with than others. But this is no small feat. We're talking about potentially thousands and thousands of samples and hundreds of thousands of analytes that we'd analyze to decide what to go to for cleanup. So this is a big effort. And in this process, we have documents that we do, and then actually work that we go do called remedial investigations, feasibility studies, and records of decision. And these records of decision really specify the cleanup that the Department of Energy will commit to go do. And those records of decisions ultimately result in enforceable dates by which that work will be done. So we're proposing on extending these, and at the end I'll summarize the extensions, but let me just say this is a lot of milestones being extended by a long time, up to 10 years in some cases. I want to be that candidate up front. So once you've got the decision made to, you know, what cleanup to go perform on which cleanup objects, if you will, you actually go perform the cleanup. And this is the M16 sets of milestones. And like John said, there's a number of ways that we do go perform the cleanup. In a lot of cases, we dig up the contaminants and then ship them to a permitted landfill up in the central part of Hanford. Or we demolish the building and then move that debris to that same landfill. In other cases, we determine that it's best left in place, the waste, and then we would put a cap over it that would prevent the infiltration of future water. This set of milestones is billions and billions of dollars. In fact, the total value of all these milestones is in the order of $20 to $30 billion. So The M85 sets of milestones are unique because they deal with what we call canyons. And the reason we call them a canyon is if you stood in that facility, it would look like a canyon. It's big, right? It's about 1,000 feet long. It's about 80 feet wide, 80 feet tall. A third of it's underground. And there's 5 of these canyons up on the Central Plateau. For 4 of them, they took the spent nuclear fuel from the reactors along the river and dissolved it with acid. So you got plutonium and uranium dissolved in acid. And that's how they shipped that solution, plutonium nitrate, over to the plutonium finishing plant and made plutonium. So these are very, very highly radioactive facilities. The concrete's very thick. It's like it's 4 feet thick, 6 feet thick to provide shielding to shield the workers from that equipment that did that. 4 of the facilities did that plutonium separation. 1 facility, U Canyon, did not do that. It only separated uranium from the tank waste. But because of the uniqueness of these facilities, these canyons, if you will, they deserve their own milestones. So this sets of milestones. It deals with the investigation of what's in those canyons and then what to do with those canyons at the end of the day. Now the M37 sets of milestones, this really goes back to the environmental regulations under which we're performing the cleanup, and there's certain facilities out there, if you will, that are under Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and they deserve their own sets of milestones. They're typically scattered across the sites in with the rest of the surplus sites, which is another environmental regulation that we clean up to. So these they're separated because of that status under RECRA, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and they deserve their own set of milestones. We'll talk about the delays on those in a minute. Now the last set of milestones is the M94 milestones, and this set of milestones dealt with the facilities in what we call the 300 area in Hanford. Now the 300 area in Hanford, for those not familiar, is very close to the city of Richland. It's about 5 miles north of the city of Richland, so the city of Richland would be down in this area about 4 or 5 miles. It's largely cleaned up. This used to be populated by hundreds of facilities that were radioactive. Those have been cleaned up. And 3 main cleanup items remain. One is the 324 building, which is also a highly contaminated building that about 2.5 years ago we discovered highly radioactive cesium had leaked out of the bottom of that building, about 10,000 rad per hour. And that really changed the plans. John talked about new information, sometimes delays milestones, and that's really the case here. So we basically had to stop the plans to demolish that building, get it back away from it, and came up with an engineering design to go forward with that building. Because of that condition, we're proposing delaying this milestone by about 3 years. There's 2 other waste sites that are very important associated with these M94 sets of milestones, and that's burial grounds. 61810 and 61811 burial grounds. And over the years, they received waste from the 300 area. And the 61810 burial ground is right about there at the Hanford Site. 61811 is about there. They're similar, but 61811 is much more difficult to deal with, and we haven't even started it yet. 61810 is about half done right now. And we're proposing keeping on schedule for 61810, but proposing a 3-year delay to 61811. So the big picture is there's 5 major sets of milestone series that we're proposing delays to, primarily because of change conditions and a lack of funding. And let's talk about those delays next. So just to orient you on the chart, there's the 5 sets of milestones that I talked about. And this is a summary of the work that's in those milestones. I'll repeat that. And then what to focus on are really these 2 lines, the difference between these 2 lines. So this is the existing date that is in the current tripartite agreement, and this is the proposed due date. So for this work here, which is that investigative work, characterization work up in the Central Plateau, Central Plateau, we're proposing a 10-year delay, if you will, 2016 to 2026 to perform a more extensive characterization of the Central Plateau. It also allows us to develop new technologies for remediation of such important things as the deep vadose zone. Now the vadose zone is the zone between the surface of the earth and the top of the aquifer. And the Central Plateau is about 250 feet deep. So there is contamination that stretches from the surface of the earth to the aquifer. And this would allow us a bit more time to develop technologies to remediate, if we need to, that deep beta zone. In terms of, so this is the investigation. This is actually performing the work. Now the old date was to complete the work up in the Central Plateau by 2024. And by that I mean the work is the non-canning work that's completed under a different milestone, and the non-tank farm work. You heard about the tank farms. So all work other than those two things was to be completed by 2024. What we're proposing right now is, and this is what we really like your input on, there's kind of two ways that we can deal with this, is until you really know and perform that characterization, well, you know, what's out there, it's hard to propose a date by when you're going to get done cleaning it up. So we can either do a TBD, so when we get done investigating it, that waste up the Central Plateau, then determine a date, which is what we have on this sheet, or we could, you know, guess, if you will, at a date with incomplete information, and then hope that when we get this information in the next 10 years, that that date that we, you know, did our best job of estimating comes out to be true. So there's two ways of doing that. We really like your input on that in particular. In terms of the M16 and M94 milestones, we propose holding the date for 6/18/10 at 2018, and propose delaying the extending the dates for the 324 building and the 6/18/11 railroad to 2021. In terms of the canyons, those are the long facilities, the 5 that I talked about. The current tripartite agreement has a date for 2022 for us to propose an end date for cleanup. And because of this work, and because of the massive concrete structures and the amount of work that we can get done, we believe that we should split this by about 4 years, so the date by which we give you the cleanup date would split by 4 years. And finally, with those cleanup units, propose a delay of from 2016 to 2022. So that's a summary of what we're here tonight for. This is a massive amount of work, and we understand it regulates. So why are we here? Why? Right? Why? Historically, the funds just haven't been there to complete the cleanup on the pace that we had planned. And just let me give you two numbers that are illustrated. Is if you look at we're required to request money from Congress to be compliant. We're required to do that. In fact, we do that. So in 2018, that request was about $1.9 billion. 1.9 billion. And we're getting about $1 billion, so about half, right? So we just can't do that $1.9 billion of work for $1 billion. So we really want to reset that and set the amount of work that we have in front of us that will be more commensurate with the anticipated budgets. The next thing is when we encountered those budget shortfalls where we requested in the past, well, $6 billion, and got $1 billion is a lot of money. What did we choose to do? We chose not to do the work on the Central Plateau that we just talked about. We chose instead to do the work along the Columbia River. And in fact, we've done things like move about 15 million tons or so of radioactive hazardous material off the Columbia River up into the central part of the site. We put 6 of 9 reactors into safe storage. The 7th reactor is now part of the national park. We're working on the other 2 reactors. So when those budget shortfalls came, we chose to concentrate on the work along the river instead of the Central Plateau. And that's why some of these milestones are being proposed to be split. And then this final bullet is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act spiked the amount of money going into the Hanford Site about 4 years ago. And there's just inefficiencies associated with large increases and decreases in funding. It's much more efficient just to be a levelized funding. And so this is what we've done with this set of milestones is levelize the funding needed at about $1 to $1.2 billion.
Where is it? It's not showing.
No, this slide changed, sorry about this, but I can walk through it without that anyway. So, how many milestones did we talk about moving? So the University Milestones was 65 milestones we took a look at, 3 agencies, 65 milestones in total. And of those, 30, no change. No change at all of the 65, is 30 that remained unchanged. 19 new milestones are proposed, and those are the milestones that really lead to progress on the 5 major milestones that I talked about earlier. So we proposed 19 new milestones to track progress. We proposed 10 milestone extensions here, and they range from on the order of 3 years to 10 years. And then finally, there's been 6 milestone modifications which are proposed, and those are really concentrated down in the 300 area with those facilities and burial grounds that I mentioned earlier, with the 324 building, the 61810 and 61811 burial grounds. So how to get involved with this? Well, first of all, thanks for coming tonight. This is one way of getting involved. It's very important, so thank you. We have extended the public comment period. When we first announced the public comment period, it was set to close December 11th. We've extended it through Christmas, through the holiday, to January 15th. You can email comments to Chris in Skopek, but these should be in your package, so you don't have to write them down. They should be in your package. Public meetings, right? This is, as Peter said earlier, this is the 4th of 4. And for more information, you can either email me, John Peshon, John Price, or Dennis Hall, or Chris Skopek, and you can also follow us on social media. So, in summary, we have 5 major milestone series. It's about $25 to $30 billion worth of work, delayed by, say, 3 to 10 years because of lack funding in the past and a concentration of work on the Columbia River. So, with that, Peter?
Over that, there.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming tonight. I'm Abigail Cermak. I'm the Hanford coordinator with Columbia Riverkeeper. Who here is familiar with Riverkeeper? I see a lot of familiar faces, so I don't know if we could go into too much of what we do. Who's been to the Hanford site? Well, this picture is a picture of the Hanford Reach, which John Price actually talked a little bit about the area that runs adjacent to the Hanford site. It happens to be one of the most productive spawning grounds for Chinook salmon on the Columbia River. It's also home to hundreds of birds and mammals and plant species, some which are threatened and endangered. And what you don't see in this photo is right over here across the river is where the Hanford Nuclear Reservation is. That's where several of the reactors line the river. Now, the federal government was frankly irresponsible when they produced plutonium for atomic weapons. And because of that, large volumes of waste went to the river and went to the ground during the time of World War II throughout the Cold War. And it's estimated that about 450 billion gallons of liquid waste, radioactive and chemical waste, were disposed of into the river and into the ground. And that poses a threat, not just to the Columbia River near the Hanford Reach, but to all river communities and everyone that relies on the river, whether as a food source or to play, to recreate. And I just want to show you this really great graphic. And John Price actually talked a little bit about this as well. How is this pollution making it to the river and affecting the river? You can see here, there are tanks and burial grounds and reactors, and all of this waste has seeped into the ground, down through the soil, into the groundwater, and it's all flowing toward the Columbia River, some which has already entered the Columbia River. And these delays, and frankly they are major delays, we're talking a decade to just give the plan to clean up, right? A plan for the plan, extending that out by a decade. And then a to be determined date for the actual cleanup completion, which would clean up this waste that is making its way to the groundwater and out toward the river. So what happens when there are these major delays? And I think we really should be asking questions about the risks. This is a different photo of the contaminated groundwater on Hanford. There's 73 square miles of contaminated groundwater, much of it coming from the Central Plateau, and this is what we're talking about tonight, is this area. And you can see, these are the plumes, is moving toward the river. So what will happen in a decade? What will happen 2 decades from now when we may not have successfully cleaned up the Central Plateau area? I think these delays are increasing risks to our workers on site. It's also increasing the risk that more contamination will get into the ground and get into the groundwater, and increases the risk of it moving closer to the river. This is a photo of what will happen to iodine 129 that is coming off the Central Plateau in the year 3,890, which is really difficult for us to comprehend that far in the future. But if we don't clean up what's in the Central Plateau, the iodine, here's the river right here. It's kind of this gray line. All this iodine from the Central Plateau eventually will make it to the river. And so I think this should speak to the urgency of dealing with these issues now. And I will be a realist. We cannot stop these delays, arises going forward. But what we can ask is that a cleanup date be put in place instead of a to be determined. I frankly think that's unacceptable to just say, it will get done when it gets done. And so what we can do here tonight is ask them questions. We can ask them to please put in an actual cleanup date so that our agencies, our regulatory agencies, can hold the Department of Energy accountable to cleanup. Now, these are deadlines. This tri-party agreement is meant to put deadlines in place that the regulatory agencies can then say, hey, you said you had it cleaned up by this time. That time is approaching. Get to it. What are you going to do? So I'm really excited that as many people came out tonight as was able to make it. This is fantastic. I think we all know our government has a moral obligation to clean up this site so that it no longer will threaten the public, our environment. But I also think we all have a moral obligation to put much more pressure on our government to make sure that they do it. And all of you are doing that by coming here tonight. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Abigail. So now it's your turn, and I'm just going to open up the floor for questions, and we'll pass a couple of mics around.
Kevin talked about the bid plan. Does this mean that it is going to be delayed too? And is it, when we were actually getting tour, the people that gave us a tour said the design isn't done. So, two-part question. One, can you speak to the design and the vitrification plan? Will it be delayed to these changes?
Yes, again, I'm John Bryce with the State of Washington. I'll speak to that question because the State of Washington is working with a federal judge right now to deal with the deadlines for the vitrification plan. It is delayed. It's not part of these milestones, and we're trying to establish new milestones with the help of a federal judge.
What about the design?
the design. So a number of years ago, the state of Washington chose to ask the Department of Energy to do a design build project. So parts of the design are still in progress, and we decided to do that to move forward with things rather than waiting for the design and then starting construction.
So I walked with the woman that was walking, the professor was walking from Portland to Hanford, and we were talking as we were walking that next day, and she spoke a lot about the vitrification plant, and that, in fact, it's supposed to go for 40 years with no maintenance by humans. I mean, do we even have anything that exists like that? So all the money put toward the vitrification plant, shouldn't we just be recontaining what's already leaching and work on that on the side? Or it seems like kind of a waste of money to work on something that may or may not work and keeps getting pushed back, and rather than dealing with the problem that we can.
So maybe, and John, you can maybe address that, but the issue that we're talking about tonight is not related to the design or construction or deadlines pertaining to the vitrification plant. So just to be clear, the TPHA package that's on the table now is for cleanup in the Central Plateau, not in everything but vitrification plant.
Okay.
And so,
Is there a recontainment idea going on? Like, can you recontain, build walls around it in place? I mean, like, not have to move it, or, you know, what does the actual cleanup consist of? Digging up the waste and moving it somewhere else where it's still a problem, or I guess I don't understand that.
Yeah, so I don't know if you came late or not, but okay, so I did show a couple pictures that, describing how we do the cleanup. So the main ways we've done cleanup so far is to dig up contaminated soil and move it to a lined landfill in the center part of Hanford. And then we've also seen contaminated buildings knocked down and the contaminated rubble taken to the center part of Hanford. It's over 16 million tons of contaminated soil debris is not up there. There's some other cleanup going on. Groundwater cleanup is a big part of that, so that doesn't involve any digging or hauling. And then we're anticipating that in the Central Plateau, we'll see some other technologies used as well. I don't know that we've done actually any engineered barriers so far. I think we anticipate doing some more of those in the Central Plateau where some of the contamination is left in place. And I know we'll be using some other technologies in the Central Plateau as well. So there is contamination in what we call the deep potato zone, which is the soil above the groundwater table, from the ground surface down to 300 feet below the ground. And that's very difficult to deal with. And so we're looking at innovative technologies like chemicals that would bind up the contamination so it can no longer move. So we'll look at other technologies as well.
So that's going on now, and it's successful. I mean, because it sounds like you're moving the contamination, you know, tons that you're talking about. You're moving it to a new location, to the Central Plateau. Is that correct?
Yes. So, you know, I think all of us here feel like that cleanup has been very successful because the contamination along the river was left there in basically an uncontrolled situation. So there were landfills or burial grounds that were 50 on the river originally, and 48 of those have been dug up already. So we feel like that's been very successful. And being in a lined landfill is a much better situation when it's 10 miles away from the Columbia River versus being in an unlined landfill a couple hundred yards from the Columbia River. So I think we all feel really good about that, and I think all three of us have been involved in cleanup long enough that we remember what it was like when that cleanup started, and now you can go down there and walk around without being concerned about hazards. So we've been very happy with the results along the Columbia River.
I'm a writer, and I know that if I don't have a deadline, it may never actually get done. So I guess I'm a little concerned about not having a deadline. I understand what you're saying, that, you know, you don't know what you've got, that it's hard to say, you know, to bury it, dig it up, put a chemical in with it, develop a new technology. I understand that, but I still think that it's important to have a date that you aim for. And if you need to come back and then say, we now know this, we're gonna have to set this date next to ours, even 5 years early maybe. But I think it's important to have a date, and like I said, it would be helpful for us to know, it's like, what do you see is going to happen in those, in that, say in that 10 years for, I forget which one the 10-year one was for, I think that was 2015. So what's going to happen in that time? I mean, just the rod itself, does that take like 2 years to do? And so that's your question. What's going to happen? What are you going to be doing?
I see John pushed the mic over towards me, so I guess I'll answer this question. So one point of clarification. The TBD date is only for the very last decision that we made. So as these proposals come in, we'll be setting milestones on them. And so we've heard loud and clear from everyone that we need to set a hard date, and I'm committed to taking that back, and I think you can expect to see a hard. In regard to how long it takes, it really depends on the situation. In a very rudimentary sense, you can plan and a decision in about 4 years. And the more complicated ones is 6 to 7 years. So you'll see the first decisions coming out about 2021, 2022. Having said that, we have made a number of cleanup decisions up on the plateau already that can be implemented, provided funding. So probably one of the most important ones is we made a decision about, I'm losing track of it, but about 3 or 4 years ago, to retrieve plutonium from some liquid waste sites. So again, as soon as funding becomes available, there is work on the plateau that is ready to be implemented.
I would say, since you're a writer, I really appreciate how you express that, and I hope you'll write down those comments and submit those to us as comments.
I'm not a writer, and I don't do deadlines, but I don't think the people in the Manhattan Project had a deadline either. But they got together and they got it done. And the challenge we have now is to see the results of their work in a new light. And that's that we all thought that they helped us win the war. But I don't think anyone on the cleanup team, anyone, even the contractors who take the billions from you all, could afford an apartment in Nagasaki or in Hiroshima. But I don't think they could survive the night in a sleeping bag in a long reservation. You can't say we won the war, we wiped out a bunch of people who we were fighting, but they can still use their country. And the amount of our country that we're losing due to incompetence, malfeasance, lack of technology, foot dragging, finger pointing, paper shoveling. You know, this is probably as big as the area is, or the affected area that got hit, and it's growing, and it's spreading. And it's spreading all kinds of good things for all the fish and all the people and anyone who wants to go to that area. So I don't really have anything to say as a suggestion because I'm not involved in this directly on the ground. But you people are losing the war. This is just unbelievable. And I hope you think about that when you go home at night and when the next day you get up and you make a to-do list, and at the end of that day you convince yourself you did something. Because you haven't. Since I moved to the river, you know, in '97, I started to become aware of the issue. And, you know, it's kind of like if you're out in a canoe and there's a hole in the canoe, and you go, oh my God, I gotta get the water, the river, away from the hole, you know, instead of plugging it.
So I feel compelled to respond to that, and I want to tell you, I don't feel like we're losing the war, because if I actually took that attitude, I couldn't do my job. And I just want to give you a couple of issues or facts to think about. So we cleaned up almost 950 waste sites along the Columbia River. We have taken down over 400 contaminated buildings, and we are stopping the chromium from getting into the river. there is nothing more than stopping the chromium. That to me is a success because that is very toxic to the aquatic life. And so I take pride in doing that. Now, having said that, it is a tremendous challenge, and the work that we have to do left is it's daunting. But I have to take the attitude that we are making a tangible difference, or I couldn't get up in the morning, to be honest.
Hey guys, are we doing comments or are we doing questions?
Q&As.
Right.
Yeah, you want to clarify, Peter, since you're the, so, yeah, go ahead.
Right now, we're doing Q&A. During the formal comment period, the agencies won't be responding. It'll just be recorded for the record.
Okay, are you guys recording for the record the Q&A?
Right now, we'll have a transcript available, but what we will be responding to at the end of the comment period is the formal comments and any other comments received through January 15th.
Thank you for the clarification.
I think we had a gentleman here. Does you have a question? Yeah.
I kind of had a comment more than a question probably because I'm not quite sure we're really pushing that they should have a TB date, to be announced date, that we want a date desperately, but then at the same time, the actual officials are saying we don't know the date, which could be translated, we don't have a clue, and yet we're still saying, come on, give us the date, come on, give us the date. And I'm just wondering, is that really the best way to go? And I'm thinking, the reason they can't give us the date is these M15 milestones haven't made those milestones, right? Those are the investigated milestones, right? I guess I do have a question. So, wouldn't the fact that saying to like the funding people that you don't have a clue on the M16 milestones, wouldn't that give you the opportunity to have increased funding on the M15 investigative ones? In other words, in my perfect world, twice as many people start doing little bottles and tests and stuff, and everything goes twice as fast all of a sudden. I mean, is that unrealistic? I mean, rather than you guys make a lot of people happy by taking a guess at that M16 date, you've admitted that, I mean, they're saying it's taking a guess. So why are we all wanting to do that so badly? It makes us feel better, and then when it comes that time, let's say, well, we didn't make that, and it's 10 more years or something. So I don't know, it's just maybe a different way of looking at it, a different perspective that perhaps this could actually be productive in the sense that it could start getting more action on the M15. Now, would that happen? Would there be more funding for M15 maybe in that case? If you even understand what I'm saying, I don't know.
Can you explain the importance of?
Yeah, so absolutely. So either way, you know, the question of whether we get more funding or not is really going to be the will of Congress. And we will rally everybody in this room to talk to your Congress and senators, et cetera, to help us with that. Having said that, I guess the logic that I could see, and I can make an educated guess, obviously it won't be right, but because we were wrong before, but you know, again, we're flexible, we can move it. The nice thing about actually having the backstop is then you can say, all right, we know we have 1,000 waste sites to clean up. We know the deadline is X. And so to achieve that, here's the funding we need. So that's the flip side of the coin. Now, a little bit of scientist in me says it'll be a lot better to wait until we have all the information. But it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. So, and again, the issue is going to be, though, if we do pick a date, most people probably won't be very happy with it.
Just want to wait again. We just want to wait.
Question in the back here?
Well, I actually appreciate all the work you guys have been doing. I was surprised when I came here that there's been some significant changes and success. Appreciate that very much. And I also think, has anybody, y'all can hear me, I'm listening for you. I repeat myself, I appreciate all the work you've done. And I'm just impressed that there have been progress since I've been coming here since the early 90s. Thank you for all your hard work. It is not easy, it's daunting. And I also wanted to know, do each one of your agencies lobby Congress? Do you guys have insiders that can bring more of the billions needed to these efforts?
So we'll go down the line. We are not allowed as federal employees to lobby Congress. What we are going to do this year, which is unprecedented, is my administrator is going to go with a senior manager from DOE and go copy on Office of Management and Budget. And, which is pretty dangerous for another federal agency because, as you know, EPA is not very well liked back when it comes to funding. But again, they feel that it's important enough to go and at least have that conversation. John has a different answer.
I'm in the state of Washington. We're also not allowed to lobby, but what we do is we do brief the congressional staff people about what the budget needs are, and Ecology also sends an annual budget letter, and sometimes we do it from my boss, and other times we've actually had the governor of the state of Washington and the governor of Oregon co-sign letters. So we try and communicate to the Congress people, but we can't actually lobby.
Well, apparently, we in the lay world use lobbying very loosely. That's exactly what I meant. How do you bring your expertise and the seriousness of what you do to your superiors? And do those people really stand up for not just the people who are in Washington, but all the people, it goes out to the ocean, down the coastline. Are they standing up for what you three people, all the workers are doing?
Yeah, so the state of Washington, we do talk to the staff people. We have some staff people that are very interested in the Hanford cleanup and are very engaged. So we give them briefings all the time about the importance of the work, the relative priorities, and the risks as well. In particular, Senator Patty Murray's office has been very engaged, very supportive, and she is all the time asking for more money to go to Hanford cleanup. A lot of times that's just to put back money that's taken away from the Hanford budget. And you have to realize too, she's one of 100 senators, there's 50 states, and so they're all competing for money. And she's a big advocate that she's got to get a majority vote to put more money into Hanford cleanup.
So who are the stumbling blocks? Where's the fact, where are the what do you say, the log jam that's keeping us? I mean, yeah, Department of Energy, so where's the log jam?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, there were actually more Department of Energy sites that were active in more states. So the Colorado site got cleaned up. The Ohio state, which has a big congressional delegation, has been cleaned up. So there's a lot less congressional support now. The other big thing that's been going on in our Congress, it's mine too, for a number of years, is the budget never gets passed. There's what's called a continuing resolution. And that's just the Congress not doing their job, frankly. When that happens, the budget gets frozen at the previous year's level or even a smaller percentage of the previous year's level. So one thing you can do is encourage your congressional delegations to pass a budget. And they're trying to get a 2-year deal done now, I think. And I think we'd all be better off for all kinds of programs, including Hanford, if they would do their job and pass a budget.
Yeah. So I'm John Peschel, I'm with the Department of Energy. We can't lobby, but we can do what we can. And I think there's 2 important things that we are aware of. Is that number 1 is we have to make sure that that $1 billion goes to cleanup. And we talk about how that happens, and that every cent is spent on productive work. We try very hard to do that. The second thing is we're not just saying, well, we don't have enough budget. Can't do anything about it. We've implemented a cost savings process, and we've saved about $1 to $2 billion off of cleanup. And we presented that process to the Oregon Cleanup Board, and they've seen it, right? So those numbers are a bit fuzzy, but we've saved a lot of money that way. So that's the 2 things that the Department of Energy can do: is spend that money as wisely as we possibly can and make cheap, good cleanup, not dirty cleanup, good cleanup as cheap as we can.
Perhaps I'm not very familiar with your problems, but to what degree does a delay allow more of this groundwater to away from us? Is the short question. In what respect are we risking more damage with these ones?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take a start at that. So in 2010, the state, actually back in 2009, the state of Washington reached an agreement with the Department of Energy to settle on missed deadlines for the tank waste and the vitrification plant. Unfortunately, we're back in court again with them on those deadlines, but part of the settlement was they agreed to do more earlier about groundwater cleanup. And so there's actually a huge groundwater cleanup going on in the central part of Hanford. I showed a picture earlier of a groundwater treatment facility, and that pumps about 2,000 gallons per minute. State-of-the-art technology picks up all the contaminants. So that's kind of the good news. There is some bad news mixed in there as well. One of the examples I gave is just the clean water lines and sewer lines at Hanford have been out there for 75 years now. And that infrastructure, if you will, is the last thing to get additional money because it's not cleanup, right? If you replace a pipe, you're not cleaning up anything in the environment. Unfortunately, that infrastructure is starting to break down over the years, and we see, clean water lake leaks, and that has the potential to go through contaminated soil and push more contamination to groundwater. So far, we've been lucky that that hasn't happened, but if you don't invest money into the infrastructure, it could happen in the future. And that just seems like a waste of money to put more clean water lines and more sewer lines into a site that you want to close down.
So the subject delays really don't affect the seepage.
In the short term, they don't, but the thing that's happening is those uncontrolled waste sites are getting left out there for decades more, where if there was a clean water leak, there's something that can go through rather than that contamination being cleaned up and put in the landfill or having a cover over it where the water leak is.
Question here and then one, Jerry.
Excuse me, I don't quite understand the politics between the state of Washington and Ecology and the feds. You're in the tri-party agreement. I'm wondering what would happen if the state of Washington said, no, we don't agree with these delays. And that's question 2, why don't you do that?
Yeah, so I'll answer first, and Dennis might have an answer too. So the answer is sometimes we do that, and we can confuse our fights. The example I've given is we think we can probably pick any one milestone out and make the Department of Energy do it. We don't feel confident that we can make them do every single milestone across the board. And right now we're putting a big portion of our legal resources into the tank waste and vitrification plant milestones and trying to get those fixed yet first. Occasionally we'll issue monetary penalties, and I've seen the Department of Energy actually get back on track with milestones sometimes that way. But we try and think of different ways to get the Department of Energy to meet the milestones, and sometimes we don't feel like there's another alternative.
Yeah, and this would be a very satisfactory answer. But so the work, for the most part, that we're proposing tonight is under the Superfund law, and EPA has regulatory jurisdiction over that. So what would happen in the case if the state didn't raise a dispute, probably with EPA, and there's dispute provisions, but ultimately the EPA administrator decides. And so, as John said, they would really have to feel confident that they're doing the right thing, because in the end, EPA is the decision maker.
Jerry?
Thank you. I'm Jerry Paulette with Heart American Northwest. Work with the Columbia River Keeper and other public interest groups. And for those of you who don't know me, I just got down here. I was a state legislator in Washington. So I want to start by noting that, of course, Washington State can and does lobby, as does the state of Oregon, a lot on net cleanup funding. Right? The federal agencies can't go and talk to a senator unless they're asked to, or without official permission from up above. But the state of Washington and the state of Oregon often are on Capitol Hill fighting with the Energy Department because the Energy Department says we're only asking Congress for 1.7 billion, let's say, for Hanford cleanup for next year. And the tri-party agreement Milestone snapped up and costs 2.5 billion, actually more. And the problem is that the state of Washington has to start out behind the curve as the state of Oregon, because if the president's budget request for the Energy Department doesn't include all the money for the milestones, then you're behind the curve when you're starting out and you're trying to add money to the budget above and beyond the president's budget. So the problem, the fundamental problem, is that the Energy Department is supposed to be required to ask for all the money to meet the milestones, and they don't. They play a game, and here at Hanford they say, we told headquarters how much money it would take, and that meets our obligation. That doesn't meet their obligation. Their obligation is to A, request the money for the milestones, and B, they are only let off the hook for a milestone for not being funded if Congress literally explicitly says we refuse to fund a certain milestone. Otherwise, the court can, and courts have ordered them to do the work. It's tough luck if they didn't ask for enough money. That's why the courts ordered them to do work. I just think that's very important to make that clear, and that Washington State has, of course, a problem. My question tonight comes from reflecting on discussion in Seattle 2 nights ago. And for those of you who haven't seen, there's last month a burial ground similar to the 43 miles of burial grounds that are at Hanford Central Plateau that are part of this milestone that will be played. A burial ground in Nevada literally blew up. And I encourage you to just Google radiological or radioactive waste landfill explosion Nevada. You'll see the desert expanse that is just the surface area, just like at Hanford, and then you'll see literally an underground, unlined set of trenches exploding because of probable chemical reaction, because they don't know what was in the trenches. And this happened in Nevada last month. There was no monitoring around the trench where they happened. We don't know what went up. We don't know what's in it, and there are 43 miles of trenches like that at Hanford. And my question is, I realized after Tuesday night's meeting, I haven't heard anything from the agencies about one iota of urgency about whether or not you're looking at what is in the 43 miles of trenches at Hanford or the Ecology site to make sure that similar chemicals weren't co-exposed in these trenches, which you're proposing to delay the investigation for by a decade and not have any completion milestones for.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that. So first of all, we have spent a lot of effort looking at the records for those burial grounds. There's actually been, I looked just last week at a 2-volume report on the history of those burial grounds. It's been around since the 90s. And the Department of Ecology has pushed the Department of Energy to gather even more information. We wanted them to grab every bit of information that they could. And I think we feel like finally, about probably 15 years into developing the work plan, they've finally done that. In terms of delaying the investigation, they're not actually delaying the investigation of those burial grounds. One of the employees in my office actually rode in a helicopter just last month, I think, going over those burial grounds, doing radiation surveys. So that work is ongoing. We have a work plan, which basically we've approved the work. We're working on some, wording that's really not important as far as what work gets done, but we have a work plan And there is a milestone in this package that has a decision being made for those burial grounds by 2023. And that's based on, I think, about 5 years of field investigation, which I think is about $25 million worth of work. John might know the number better than me. I don't know what but it's a bunch of work of those burial grounds. So the burial ground investigation is not delayed by 10 years. It's planned to be completed by 2023.
It was due in 2016, so it's 9.5 years of delay for the milestone.
Yeah, so let me talk about that again. So the first time Ecology got an RAFS work plan for those burial grounds was in 2005. And we looked at it and we decided it was not sufficient. We asked the Department of Energy to do more records reviews. They did that. We got another work plan. We asked for some field work to be done. They did that field work. We looked at the results of the field work. We still were not satisfied that we had enough information, so we asked them to do more field work, which is the $25 million worth of work that's in the current revision of the work plan. So I think what we've done is really try to be very cautious about making sure we got enough information so a good decision could be made for those burial grounds, considering how large they are, 43 miles as you mentioned, and how many different things went in there and all that, and that the potential hazards. We've been very deliberate trying to get to a good decision.
I have a couple of questions that I asked last night in Portland, but thought I would ask again for the benefit of everyone sitting here. If deadlines can be routinely pushed back, what is the incentive to staying on track and actually meeting these deadlines?
I remember that last night.
Oh, good. Is it
So
a tough one?
so that was asked last night. Let's see if I can give a consistent answer. So again, given the situation here on the Central Plateau, it was a unanimous decision from the agencies to delay this work. I like to say extend the schedules to the right. And that's not always the case. And I'll use an example.
You got it, man. Mike,
The K-basin sludge is an example.
Oh,
And
okay.
obviously, we've been talking to us because we killed their mic. There was a situation where the Energy unilaterally decided to fund work that was very important to EPA, and I think, quite frankly, the citizens of the Pacific Northwest, they're going to end up leveling fines. Obviously, they couldn't recover the schedule that was in the priority agreement, so we did end up extending it, and they didn't pay it, but I consider it a decent fine. In this situation, it's different, because again, we all chose to go ahead and fund other work, particularly along the river. And so again, in good conscience, I wouldn't feel good about minimizing that, because that's really the only option we're given is if you don't meet the deadline, then we enforce stipulated penalties. Is that close to the answer I gave yesterday?
I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't ask that question.
I think you did ask it, I'm sure.
So you talked a little bit about, the possibility that a water line will break and it could cause water to go in the soil, infiltrate it, bring contamination down to the ground. Can you talk about maybe additional risks to the environment, and also maybe some of the increased risks to workers, that might be caused by these delays?
Yeah, I'll maybe let John talk about increased workers. I guess one other risk I would mention is there's a number of biological contamination incidents at Hanford. That's things like contaminated rabbits, contaminated tumbleweeds. I don't know the numbers, but a number of those incidents are increasing. And generally those come from relatively small, relatively shallow waste sites. And they're not real significant probably in terms of the total volume of contamination, and they're not the highest concentration waste sites. But that's an example of something, and the Department of Energy spends a substantial amount of money every year dealing with those kind of incidents. They spend a substantial amount of money doing things like spraying herbicides and trapping and so on to try and keep that from happening. So that's one example of the ongoing risk from spending actually a relatively small amount of money to clean up the small shallow waste sites, which are not as significant as the big, really nasty waste sites.
And I guess I'll just add one other thing, and it's not really a risk, but it's a fact of life that, as an example, one of the camping facilities we have to put a roof on. And so we're going to incur incremental costs as we continue to wait on particularly the buildings. Because again, we don't want to release contaminants, and again, from a worker safety perspective, almost all of our fatalities at Hanford have been from working on either roofs or other types of facilities. So it's probably the highest risk work that you put a worker in outside of what's going on with the finishing.
So one thing I want to talk about is, most of this work, we know basically what it's going to cost. Some very close, some, a bit off. And it's not like we just don't go do the work. We're not going to go contract for work we can't afford, right? It makes no sense to go find a contractor to do $10 worth of work when you only have $5 in your wallet. So you're exactly right. There's some things we choose not to do because we don't have the money. Right now, there's some, obviously it's not perfect. There's some mistakes we've made, and I'm not going to put it all on the money. But it's really important. It's not just a choice. We all want to get this work done. Department of Energy employees want to get this work done. But it doesn't make any sense to go line up a contract, like I said, for $10 worth of work when you have $5 in your wallet. So let's talk a little bit about worker health and safety. There's no good claim. I'm not going to try and talk about it. It would be best to clean it all up now, but it goes back to how much can you afford. And in terms of the workers, I would encourage you to go look at that video that Jerry talked about. But in order for us to clean that up, we have to put workers in harm's way potentially. And we're not going to do that until we investigate what is in there and understand what's in there and have the safeguards and controls so we can put workers in there in a safe environment, right? We all know we have to clean it up. So it's not just as simple as you just go clean it up. And why does it take a long time? Well, because he's exactly right. We're not totally certain what's in there. To put a worker in there is even more important. So in terms of delays in the canyons, there is no doubt that the contamination is spreading within the canyons. Once again, they're massive facilities designed to hold and contain that contamination. So it's not a good story, but we think it's the best story that we can tell right now in terms of, and that's why you saw those canyons getting delayed a little bit more than the other works, because we think those canyons are very thick concrete. They're designed to hold that contamination. So that's the sort of trade-offs we make every day when we try to do this cleanup.
Okay, one last question. So you consistently mention that what you're finding is worse than what you thought was going to be there, and that seems to be a real common theme. And I'm just wondering if there has come a point in the cleanup where you are just planning ahead a little bit better because you know that you're going to find something worse than what you thought was there. So you're building in this contingency plans while you're planning. And we've heard this before. There's more there than we thought there was. And so I'm just kind of curious about how are you building in the unexpected, into your planning. And when did you know, and I asked this of Dennis yesterday, when did you know that you were going to have to delay these deadlines? A couple years ago? 4 years ago? A decade ago?
I'll tell you what, I'll take the first time. How do we build in contingency? And Dennis, you can talk about the other one. How's that sound? So, yeah, there's no doubt that certain of this turns out to be worse than what is certain, it'll be different than we thought. Some is better than we thought. Like, for instance, the McCluskey room and Tony finishing plant turned out to be not as contaminated as the rumors and the folklore had been. And by the way, the Tony finishing plant is the most hazardous facility on the Hanford site by the document safety analysis, and we hope to have slab on grade done within a year. So what we do is through a rigorous software curve masters, we have the experts sit down and go, okay, here's what's the plan. and what could go wrong? And what could go wrong, and what could we do to make this better? And then you do the analysis, and then we have what's called contingency, which is sort of extra money set aside, if you will, or extra schedule set aside. Now, we just don't have a bag of money sitting there doing nothing. What we do is we put all every last penny to work, and then if something happens wrong in a project, we know which ones to delay, right? So today, right, just take a look at 2015. One contractor came out right on in terms of cost variance. The other was 15% under budget. Both were on schedule. So that's at the top corporate level. So things are different, no question about that. Some are better, some are worse, but we do have a pretty rigorous way of dealing with that.
And from a milestone perspective, we don't factor in contingency. What we do is, based on good cause, we'll move them. And I think it's been very successful over the past several years. I knew about a year after we negotiated the last set of changes on the Central Plateau work. And the reason I knew that is because they needed to start that work that year. We gave them, I think it was a 2-year relief. And they needed to start that work back in about 2011 or 2012. They didn't start it. So that's why we're here today.
Are you okay with that?
Well, in the perfect world, no, but it's reality because, again, I really want to finish the river corridor work. And you can only do so much with the funds that you've got. So right, wrong, or different, we're forced to make trade-offs.
I have a question about budget. So if we're going to be talking to our congressional reps, does all the money come from Department of Energy? Does some of it come from the Superfund side? Now we're going to have Department of Interior in there with the National Park. So are they going to contribute some money to the EPA with their Superfund funds? I mean, where does the money come from?
So it's all allocated from Congress, and the Department of Energy has a specific line item for environmental management, and they get about $5.6 billion a year for the cleanup across the nation. And then Hanford gets about 45% of the budget. We're not very popular with the rest of the state, to be honest. And EPA's budget for oversight comes directly from Congress. And then the state is actually has some grants from the Department of Energy for their oversight.
There's no line items in EPA with the Department of Interior.
So again, there is line items for the Department of Energy. There is a line item for EPA's federal facility oversight, which I am a very tiny part of.
All right, thanks for coming out again. Regarding the deadline, I tend to be very skeptical about postponing again. I understand the rationale that technology can improve, but we are also in a weird time of profound political ignorance and anti-science. And every day I see articles where these knucklehead politicians want to gag scientists or cut funding. And it seems to me that the more rational approach would be to keep your deadlines and for your top administrators to put in for seriously legitimate budgets, you know, DOE and EPA and any other federal agency that might be involved. I think it's better to stay with it and don't slide because of this political culture we're in right now. We've got to snap out of this idiocy.
Amen.
So we're right about 7:30. We have 7 people signed up for public comment at this point. Why don't we take a few more questions and then we'll see where we're at.
Is somebody getting rich off of this?
I'm going to say what is, right, and you can make up your mind whether you want to believe me, but this is the total question, right? Is all our rates are audited, right? Every contractor rate is audited. The amount of money that people get paid is audited. The amount of fees the public has paid to these companies. So yeah, if contractors are making some money out of this, they wouldn't be here. They're 4 feet contracted, right? We know what we're going to pay them. So yeah, people are making money, they're getting rich. I'm reminded of a quote a long time ago, believe it or not, from Gordon Thomas. Remember that person? He was a catcher for the Seattle Mariners and a long time ago. And so you get rich off the sergeant. He goes, well, compared to a teacher that's making $28,000 a year, heck yeah, I get rich off this thing. But compared to some other people that are CEOs of the companies that are losing money, no, I'm not getting rich. So it's not the best answer I can give you.
Is pushing back the deadlines, like making it possible for people to make more money?
No, not really. What it is, it's going to cost the taxpayers money in the long term. So I guess you could say that the longevity of the job, you could take that stance, but ultimately, and I made this clear the other night, obviously, probably can't do anything about it, but I'll just state the facts. So back 15 years ago, the Department of Energy had a $6.5 billion cleanup. They cleaned up some of the smaller sites. We lost a lot of political will on those sites were cleaned up. And now we're at a $5.6 billion budget. So if somehow we can grow that budget back to $6.5 billion, we can get so much more work done. And so that's my goal before I expire, is to try to get that budget back to where it's supposed to be.
How do we help you do that?
Talk to your Congress people. Go see Ron White. Go see Ron White.
Taking care of the poor locals, Oregon, Washington, what do we do about the other 96?
Well, the good news is we have South Carolina, we have Tennessee, we have Nevada, and we have Idaho. And so again, there's an intergovernmental meeting as we speak in New Orleans right now. And I hope they're having the same conversation on how do we get Congress to understand that they've got an obligation here to fulfill.
I know my representative of the House is eager to get rid of my representative of the House, Craig Walden, is eager to get rid of the EPA altogether. And if he and his ilk manage to swing the next election, what are you going to do with your new spare time?
Golf.
No, seriously. I mean, what's going to be going down over there when there's a budget at the EPA to give you 45% of it?
Yeah, so again, we, just as a fact, we have lost 45% of our federal staff overseeing these cleanups across the nation. We don't only do DOE, but we do the Department of Defense. And we're doing less, we're doing more with less, and we're flying at a higher level, quite honestly. And again, EPA is not a very popular agency right now with Congress, and ultimately, even if they do get rid of EPA, someone still has to make sure that we don't have air like we did in 1967, where you couldn't breathe the air. So I'm confident the nation itself won't let us slip back into that kind of situation.
Well, they will if you let them cut the school budget. You reap what you sow.
Any other questions?
Seems to me that you guys really need some money that needs to be raised to a higher level of focus. I love Idaho and Tennessee, but we're all small potatoes when you look at the big states like Texas and California. So maybe we should raise it to a higher level standard. Maybe we should be under Homeland Security instead.
That would be
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm personally very frustrated with Hanford cleanup, even though I have a lot more control than most of you do, because I saw the cleanup pace during the years of American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, and twice as much cleanup got done. So I know a lot more cleanup can get done faster, and it does take more money. So I'm very frustrated that it's not happening, because I want it to happen as fast as it possibly can.
Any final questions, or ready to go to public comment? One more question?
Well, you guys sound very sincere that you want to, have it be done, but I have to say it's a pretty grim picture for anyone living along the river because, our whole lifestyle, as we know here, from the Indians to the fishing to the trees to the fact that toxins will kill everything and change our lifestyle, our real estate. It would affect everything. And I mean, I tried really hard to get a lot of people here, and the people that are here, I'm so grateful that you came. But I don't think even the people that live along this river realize what is really going on. And if they did, this room would be full. And to me, it's just a grim picture. I mean, I've worked for the government. I worked for the post office, I've worked for the Forest Service, and the state. And I know how much waste and, time is wasted in federal agencies. I've seen it. And it's just, to me, I mean, you guys are saying that you're doing your best, but, I don't know. I would love to know what we could really do other than, have $5 million for you. But, I mean, to really get this going to where more people could learn about it and realize what's really at stake. And, you hear, I don't want to name call politicians, but there's the talk of jobs all the time. You guys you got your job for the rest of your life, and so does everybody out there if they want to work, if they live to continue to work. But, that's not what it's all about. It's about having a job, doing the right thing. And it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of a futile thing. If there's the shutdowns, what happens with the shutdown? You guys still get your money?
We hope.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that government shutdown, and this just happened. So this is about a year and a half ago, we had that threat of a government shutdown in September, right? September, October. We spent about $20 million. We have a Category 2 nuclear facility full of 27 cubic meters of sludge that requires highly professional people. And we spent around the order, I think it was, my memory might be a little bit, it's a lot of money, prepared to shut that down, right? And then Congress came through with the money, and then after we had almost shut down, we had to ramp back up again. And it was a small part of the reason that we couldn't meet the milestones. There's other milestones, there's other reasons for that. So government shutdowns and sequestration, I'm just telling you, they cost money, and they don't get cleaned up.
All right, thank you everyone. Lots of good questions tonight. We're going to go to formal comment period now. I think the agencies are willing to stay over afterwards for a few minutes at the end of the meeting to continue. Okay, John. We can continue this conversation. Of course, you have the contact information for all these three gentlemen up here in your presentation, so contact them anytime as well. Got 7 people signed up for comment. Can go through those names first, and then anyone who didn't sign up, who still wishes to comment, welcome to do so. And of course, this is just one of several ways you can issue comments. You can turn in written comments tonight. You can email us or mail us comments through January 15th for this issue. So let's start with John Wood. Please wait for the microphone, and if you could introduce yourself, please, before you start your comments, we'd appreciate that.
Hi, I'm John Wood from Hood River. I think I'd like to call for sanctions against those who missed their deadlines. I think you should have hard deadlines for the cleanup of this stuff. And I think that if those deadlines are met, then there should be some sort of reward. And if those deadlines are missed or pushed back, then there should be some sanctions, enforceable sanctions against the personnel and the management of the people doing the work and managing the work, whether that's government employees or private contractors. There's got to be some accountability here. I don't think anyone who's going to retire with a government pension knows anything about business, because they just have never seen it done. That's what I like to say.
Thank you. Kristen?
McNall on Mosier, and I'm going to first say that I'm pretty disappointed in the delays. I'm pretty disappointed in the progress. I'd like to see more getting cleaned up. But given that things are taking so long, there was a comment made in Richland a couple weeks ago about, okay, what are your priorities? And I realized my priorities are things I've heard in this room tonight quite a bit, staying safe. I think there's a couple things out of Hanford that are pretty serious. Number one is WESIF, which is the Waste Encapsulation Storage Facility. What that is, for those of you who don't know, is it's a concrete swimming pool. It's filled with cesium strontium capsules. It contains, like, it's 40% of the radiation at Hanford. And were that facility to lose cooling water, it would go critical and produce a true nuclear disaster. The only thing that we're arguing about at this point is how big an earthquake would it actually take? Because it turns out that radiation rots concrete. So there's actually US DOE reports out there that say it's the single biggest beyond design risk issue. There's other reports out there that say we don't actually know how bad the concrete is. And then, of course, we're all reading about earthquakes in this. So I would like to see WESIF lift very tippy top of the priority list of start cleaning up tomorrow. And in WESIF's case, it's pretty straightforward. We need to take those cesium strontium capsules and put them into dry cask storage where we don't have to worry about a swimming pool losing water. I'm going with a fairly non-technical approach, but these guys over here know way more about it than I do. Anyway, so number one, I'd like to see WESIF into dry cask storage as soon as possible, and I'd like to see that project fully funded, whatever it takes. And quite frankly, I'm going to go but I'm willing to accept anything else getting pushed down. And then secondly, I'd like to see the 324 building. I'd like to see the waste underneath that building remedied sooner rather than later. It's that red spot right over next to the river. And the issue is that there was a big old nasty spill a couple decades back. There's a lot of waterways around there. And I've been dealing with leaky pipes on my property quite a bit lately. I think it was wasn't it John who just said that we've got a lot of aging infrastructure out at the Hanford Site? So I'd like to, one of the issues is there's a lot of water pipes in that general area. If there were to be a big spill and it were to flush the waste from the 324 building in the river, that would not be a good thing. So even though there's a roof over it, I don't think we can count on that. So I'd like to see the 324 building towards the top. Thanks for coming out, guys.
Thank you. You're good. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Been doing this party for over 25 years, coming to these sessions. And if there's two concepts, you guys, I think, are really trying hard. The other one is there's a series of missed delays. So when I heard tonight more extensions for deadlines, what is new? Nothing's new. And I think you've got to do something different. Think out of the box to meet these. And I'm going to be very firm about wanting concrete, I agree with my right of life, but it need very specific deadlines. If you don't, then it's all too easy. It's human nature to say, well, just budget out there. It is human nature to say, I'm going to try to meet that deadline. If I didn't, someone's going to hold you accountable. I think if you extend the deadlines, and especially have one to be announced, I think that's a violation of treaty rights. Our tribal friends, I think, I'll see you in court.
Didn't have meeting dates or meeting times, so that has excluded a large part of the population from being here at this meeting today. And so I would like to see the agencies collaborate better with public interest groups that are effective at turning out people to these meetings by giving us more time. And I would also like to see public engagement happen in a more meaningful way. Not everyone wants to come to public meetings, And these issues are highly technical, and I do want to say the changes that you've made to your presentations from what I saw in Richland, I give them a thumbs up. The explanation was better, but I think for all of us to understand really what's happening in Hanford, having more town hall meetings, state of the site meetings, focus groups, roundtable discussions where we can really hear about these issues at a street level in English, not in Hanford, would really benefit the public and maybe get more people to then come to these public meetings to give comment. But we need to figure out how to make public engagement meaningful, because as you say, you want the public to be involved and be engaged. And that's my comment.
Thank you. Karen Harding.
My name's Karen Harding. I'm from Hanford, and I really have appreciated the meeting tonight. I'm sorry we're slightly late. I would second your last point there on getting the public more involved. It's been hard to talk with people about this in the long history of cleanup and that sort of evolutionary process of where can the public be most helpful. You know, there's been really combative, confrontive atmosphere for a very long time. And, you know, it slogs on. It just slogs on. I think meetings where we were talking about what would happen with an earthquake and some of these more volatile, dangerous areas would be a very important discussion to have in our communities. And I know that takes money for the personnel to get it set up and do all of that, but it's probably a tiny amount of money compared to, you know, what the overall cleanup. So if we are interested in generating more money, you know, and so I can remember in the 90s talking about flatline budgets, like why do we keep just underestimating, not underestimating, but under asking for the money that's really needed, and then, you know, and then you get half of that. It's like more people involved with the dangers that are in front of us, lobbying for more people connecting on those issues. It sounds like what we need. I mean, I appreciate that the cleanup is going on, and you know, I appreciated hearing that it's 45% of the overall EPA budget. I never knew that. So there are lots of things tonight to be involved. So thank you for having the meeting. We can have more group meetings, smaller groups in between these larger meetings. I would vote for that. I really hope you don't have a very we get to solve this problem.
Thank you. Jerry?
Jerry Paulette for Heart of America Northwest members tonight. I want to start with our comments by pointing out that Governor Jay Inslee has said repeatedly that having enforceable milestones and schedules was a fundamental principle for Hanford cleanup. And the state of Washington has gone to court for that principle in regard to vitrification plants. And actually won a major court decision when U.S. District Court Judge for Eastern Washington in mid-August found that not having an enforceable schedule led to a lack of accountability on the part of the Energy Department. And what was being argued in that case was the Energy Department's view that they wanted to first study the problem, then develop their proposed schedules with their contractors, and then they would have milestones. Does that sound familiar? And the question is, why are 43 miles of trenches and all the contaminated soil sites on the Central Plateau not being given the same fundamental principle that you have to have enforceable milestones in place to drive the work? Without enforceable milestones, you have no funding. There's no legal requirement for funding. And what we've seen repeatedly is that the state of Washington and EPA have made the same mistake over and over again. And to me, it's very disconcerting, and to the public, it's very disconcerting that you haven't learned the lesson. So when you replace enforceable milestones with, quote, target dates, unquote, for retrieving waste from burial grounds, just 6 or 7 years ago, I believe, the Energy Department at public meetings said, but we'll ask for the money and we'll still get the money for it. And what happened? They didn't ask for the money, and state and EPA could not enforce missing schedules for that. And it's put us significantly behind. So having deadlines is essential. Having a deadline for retrieving waste from contaminated soil sites is not rocket science. We know what it takes to retrieve the waste from the burial grounds and the contaminated soil sites because of the work done along the river. Yes, some sites may take longer when you go in and you discover the contamination is worse, but we already have learned that from the work along the river, where they didn't know there would be spent fuel and transuranic plutonium wastes in those burial grounds, and now we know how long it takes and what the cost is to clean up burial grounds like that. So the question is, why would we not have a firm milestone to say you have to complete the soil site cleanups by the year, and based on what we're looking at, we believe 2030 is the reasonable time frame. And the safe and risk-based time frame that's appropriate is only to extend it 6 years. Now, this brings up the issue of notice, as Advocate from the River Keeper has brought up, because we were given this set of agreement change packages to the public on October 26th. The first public meeting was November 4th. I think we're now 23 days after this was released. We've barely had enough time as a public interest group to delve in and look at the comparison of risks. And here we are, and the agencies are saying to you, the public, trust us or tell us what you would trade off. That's not fair. Because you rely on the public interest groups to do that research and say, well, wait a minute, the agencies haven't disclosed one word about the level of chemicals in those trenches and what those potential risks are and how fast they're spreading. What is the level of carbon tetrachloride, and is it at a level that is actually immediately dangerous to human health being spread from these trenches? Yes, it is. What is the risk of delaying that? What is the risk of explosion? You won't find that there. What is the risk to groundwater from a delay of 15 years when containers in the ground are deteriorating? We don't know. Well, and how does that compare to the 618-11 burial ground by the Energy Northwest Columbia Generating Station nuclear reactor parking lot? It's got serious risks, and not one word about those risks were in the agency's materials. So it's up to the public interest groups to try to present those risks to the public. That takes a few weeks for us to do. And then we have to review it and put it out in notices to the public. And as Abigail pointed out, there wasn't one mailed notice about these public meetings from the agencies. So their email list is much smaller than the U.S. Postal list. And what is their open rate on their emails? Not very high. I'll link to that. So it's not a surprise that we don't have a lot more people here, because had our public interest groups had time to prepare a mailing and do the turnout that we do, we probably have got a lot more people here tonight. And that brings up the final notice issue, which is what we have heard. We've been fielding calls for 3 days at Park American Northwest from people who are just plain old pissed to have found out that the meeting was started at 6 o'clock tonight. How many of you would How many of you would have preferred a meeting at 7 o'clock? The agencies told us that our groups asked for the meetings to be changed from 6 to 7. They told us they were. Your convenience, it should not be driving whether or not a meeting starts at 6 or 7. It should be the community's convenience. And I know as an elected official that if I schedule a meeting at 6 o'clock when people couldn't get there, I'd be bounced out of office. And it is unacceptable for you to have not listened to and work with the community groups in scheduling these meetings, including choosing the dates, giving us enough time to do turnout and do informed turnout. Because I think we've got to recognize that we're simply years ago gave up on the notion that the agencies were going to give you informed notice. Meaningful notice in the public involvement world is notice that tells you how a decision might affect your values. So just putting out a material that says we're changing the date is a meaningless thing. I mean, what is an M15 to you? Did the materials that were put out, did the mailers say there are 43 miles of unlined trenches? Sorry, not there. So it's up to the public interest groups to tell you that. And if you're going to partner with us, you need to partner with us and collaborate with us, or not pretend that you actually give them. I'm sorry that's harsh, but given the effort that the public interest groups put in, we have to be harsh, because this is not the first time, it's not the second time, it's not the third time we've had the same experience. And there has to be a consequence for that. Finally, I want to close by pointing out that if you apply the rationale discussed tonight for putting in a date to be determined instead of a major milestone with a firm schedule, what element of Hanford cleanup would survive? Because that rationale is what the Energy Department, as I said, tries to apply to the vegetation plant schedule and to removing tank wastes. And literally it applies to anything. There would be no deadlines for completing any major area of cleanup at Hanford under the rationale that we'd like to study it first and then propose with our contractor what the schedule should be. What that means is that it's based entirely on the budget priorities of the Energy Department, which can't be trusted. We've talked a lot about how you can talk to members of Congress. I would urge you to talk to U.S. Representative on this side of the river and U.S. Representative on that north side of the river, because while everyone says we ask for money for Hanford cleanup, the fundamental issue is that if your member of Congress says that they support slashing discretionary spending, that means your member of Congress is supporting slashing this portion of the Hanford and the Energy Department's cleanup budget. And when they threaten a shutdown over something, that has a real impact, as John, I think, very honestly talked about tonight. I appreciate that, because it has a real impact. And so when legislators, members of Congress say, I support funding Hanford cleanup, but they next minute tell an audience that they want to slash discretionary spending, or they want to eliminate the Energy Department and EPA, then you need to join in holding them to account. Because what they're saying is, this is the type of program that they don't care about. And it is very hard when you look at the Ecology and EPA budgets. EPA's entire staff are overseeing some of the largest cleanup and most complicated and dangerous contaminated site in the Western Hemisphere is, I believe, 7 people. 3 people now? 3 people. And they're responsible not only for this site, but some of the other most contaminated sites in North America. So they're trying hard to do their job. Let's encourage them and give them our support by saying hold firm and insist on firm deadlines that you can enforce. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last person we have signed up for comment is Sue Ludner.
I just would like to say again that I think the management of the money, so you said that you guys are flexible, so if you can, like the pool that you brought up, things like that that are obviously a higher priority because they're more dangerous, you could push the money that you have towards working on those things. If you could enforce them, like you said, keep to the deadlines. Those are basically, just stick with the plan.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to make a formal comment tonight?
The other thing I was going to say was monitoring. I'd like to know more about monitoring, like what is actually getting to the river and what the levels are and how fast they are reaching the river. That was what I meant.
So thank you everyone again for coming out tonight. I wanted to mention, and maybe you can consider this notice, at least notice of another comment period coming soon. We were out in 2013 and again in 2014 to talk about decisions for the river corridor, 300 area and 100F area. There is another decision coming soon. We anticipate in the February timeframe for a proposed plan for work along the 100D and H reactor areas along the Columbia River. So we anticipate public interest here in Hood River. See a lot of familiar faces here tonight. Obviously the river is very important. So we will be sharing more information about that as the schedule kind of materializes here. But please look for that, and we hope to engage with Abigail, with Riverkeeper more, and Jerry as well, and other interest groups to ensure that folks have enough notice to come out and that the time is right, the location is right, and everyone's able to engage on that issue and future issues. So thank you again, and have a great night.